My name is Caroline Holmes. Some of you will recognise me. I am the Programme Coordinator for the Trade Union Training Programme at the NUJ. Welcome to the NUJ's first webinar on briefing for reps on COVID-19. Thank you very much for giving up your time to come to this meeting. We really appreciate it. And also thank you to the officials for coming along and giving up their time, because I realise, and we all realise, how busy you are dealing with members' issues. So it's really good that you've been able to join this meeting. So first of all, as I've mentioned already, please remain muted throughout the meeting. We've got a lot of people here. Some of you have already asked questions, and I've already passed those on to the officials. If any of you want to ask any questions, please feel free to ask questions using the chat facility on the right hand side of your screen. And if you could start it with a capital Q, so that I know that it's a question, and then I can make a note of it, and then we'll address the questions at the end. So the session is aimed at chapel reps, but I realise there are some branch reps here as well, which is great, because this is about supporting members in workplaces. So each official is going to speak for no more than 10 minutes. This is going to be the structure really of the meeting. Each official is going to be asked to speak for no more than 10 minutes, and they're going to cover a number of issues. So they're going to talk a little bit about some of the issues and challenges that members are facing at the moment, and also give some examples of good practice. And then finally, Adam Christie is here. Thank you, Adam, for joining us. He is the chair of the NUJ's National Health and Safety Committee, and he's going to talk for no more than 5 minutes to give an update from a health and safety perspective. Please be mindful of the NUJ rules on conduct, that no one will say anything that could be offensive or discriminatory throughout the meeting, please. The webinar will be recorded because there are lots of people who would have really liked to have joined the meeting today but can't be here. So for any of you that don't want to have your faces recorded, then please do bear that in mind. Turn your cameras off, because it is going to be recorded. This will mean that the meeting will be online afterwards for any of you that need to go back over anything or want to look at anything, obviously. And also, please do tell other people and pass it on. As I've said, if you've submitted questions already, thank you very much. These have been passed on. If you do have any questions, just a reminder, start with a capital Q. Sorry, I'm just admitting somebody else in the chat, and then put your question, and then we will take the questions at the end. We'll probably have about 20-25 minutes at the end for any questions or comments. I think that's it. So I appreciate some of you. I know the broadband is really struggling today. I've already had a meeting and it just keeps dropping in and out. So apologies if it does. And of course, if any of you need to leave, please do leave whenever you need to. I totally understand. You've all got lots of things going on in your lives at the moment. So if I could ask the first official, please, Laura Davison, to start her presentation. Laura, if I could ask you to do no more than 10 minutes, and I will come in at 3 minutes. So just to remind you that you've got 3 minutes left to go. So if you'd like to unmute yourself, which you have, Laura, it's over to you.
The pressure. Thanks, Caroline. Well, I hope this will be a really useful opportunity for us to have a discussion as reps and colleagues about the sorts of issues that we're seeing at the moment, and some of the ways that we can think about tackling them and sharing ideas that people have got. And it's really brilliant to see so many people on the call. This is a first. It's a first for me as well, doing something like this, although got very used to doing Zooms of all different kinds over the last 2 or 3 weeks and seeing everybody's different backgrounds. I think the zebras, Chris, are probably up there with the best backgrounds that I've seen so far. So in a way, it's been quite useful actually just to stop for a few minutes, because it's been unbelievably busy for all of us, and just maybe take a step back and think for a couple of minutes about some of the common things that we're seeing. So I should say that I'm Laura Davison, and I am the NUJ organiser in the newspapers, news agencies and new media sector. So really the experience that I have comes from talking about those sectors. And I work with my colleague Andy Smith, but he's given his apologies for today. He's on a well-earned day off today. So Caroline asked us just to think about 3 things. The first being the challenges that people are facing, poor practice and issues to look out for. Then she asked us to think about good practice and any model agreements that we might have been able to negotiate, and then any tips that we could share with you. So I'm just going to say a couple of things on each of those headings, and I know my colleagues will have great detail on some of those things during the course of our conversations. So I suppose the biggest thing really that we've probably all felt, and certainly you as reps who have been doing a brilliant job in such difficult circumstances, is the speed with which things happened in the beginnings of this crisis. And we've really seen impact after impact on different workplaces, whether it was the initial switch to home working and the way that that was handled, or what's followed on in very many of the workplaces that we're dealing with, which has been members being placed on furlough and or being asked to take pay cuts. And those have really been the big 3 things that we've been dealing with over the last 3-4 weeks. And we have seen quite commonly that the way that employers, particularly in the newspaper sector, and I'm thinking particularly of the local publishers, have dealt with this, has really been to put very short timetables on people to respond to what the company is intending to do. And in many cases, that has meant the reality is that people haven't had any genuine opportunity to make a choice about these things. It's really been imposed. And we've seen examples of people sent emails even late at night being told then they're going to be placed on furlough the next day. And we've seen examples where it's been said that silence in responding to a communication would be taken as consent. And obviously these are very stressful and difficult moments for members. And I know you as reps will have felt the full kind of impact of that, of members contacting you and saying, what do I do? What do I do in that situation? So that's been a really difficult part of this, and a real pressure that everybody has been facing, and not an example of good practice, because like in any situation, what you would hope and expect is that there would be meaningful consultation about these issues with a view to reaching agreement with the trade union. And in many cases with our employers, we're still encouraging them into that position. A couple of other areas that I think now that we're in this situation, we're perhaps not seeing much as we need to from our employers, and that's around access to information. So really good information about the financial positions of the organisations, data, which really helps our reps to be informed and to think about how we want to respond to these things. And clearly, in the absence of information, people have to make decisions accordingly. And if we can persuade employers to really engage meaningfully and share that information, that will mean that everybody is going to be in a better place moving forward. So I would say that is a challenge that we have at the moment, to really get that engagement and access and sharing of information. We've also seen issues with gaps in, for example, the way that the government job retention scheme is being applied. And probably Pam will talk more about this, but in the national newspapers, we have people who work on a casual basis. And although people who work in that way can theoretically be furloughed under the government scheme because they are PAYE, in some cases we've seen a slowness on the part of employers to do that. I think that is changing now, which is positive to see, but there has been a really horrendous period of time for both freelancers and casuals, which I'm sure Pam will talk more about. And I know that you will have examples in your own areas of the way that freelancers particularly have been affected. So that's just a few examples of challenges, and I'm sure colleagues will share more. In terms of some good practice that we're seeing with employers and also among our chapels, we've held meetings with reps from different chapels coming together to sort of share some of the information about what's happening in their employer, and that's been really useful. And we're trying to collate some of that information, and hopefully that can be quite a useful, perhaps even a document that could be shared back out to people going forward as things that you could raise in your own workplace. So just some good examples, things like holding a weekly meeting with your employer to update on developments and to engage on the things that need to be addressed as this situation continues. We have one employer where there's a committee been set up between the employer and the union reps to have that engagement, which is good. Employers allowing people to carry holiday forward if that's needed. We've seen pressures on holidays, and these examples, you know, they're not across the piece at the moment. You know, there's a mixed picture in terms of how employers are dealing with this, but these are good examples that you can raise with your own employers. We have seen examples of where, if there has been a reduction in pay, that has been matched by a reduction in hours, or the possibility of additional holiday being awarded in future.
Sorry, Laura, you've got 2 minutes left.
Okay, thanks, Caroline. The rotation of members who are on furlough is another example of something that we have seen and might be good practice on a voluntary basis with agreement of individuals. Impact assessments is a good thing to press for. How are people being affected by the proposals that companies are putting forward, and logging the impact of things yourselves as chapels. So additional hours that people are working, keeping a record, any additional costs that people are facing because they're working at home. And in the last 1 minute, some tips. Use your journalistic skills, I would say, to scrutinise and question what your employer is doing. Don't panic if your employer comes forward with proposals. If something seems unreasonable in terms of a timetable to respond, it probably is unreasonable. And that there is time. You know, you can't deal with everything at once. With the best will in the world, you can only do what you can do. And there is time to think these things through and to do that collectively. But we do also need to be proactive and to be pushing our employers on these issues for our members. And the last thing I'll say is that this is an organising opportunity as well. And we have seen new joiners to the union, and we have seen chapels bringing forward new reps and contacts. So there is a real opportunity to get members engaged and involved. And actually these platforms allow, in some ways, more ways to do that, because you're not bound by being in a particular geographical place at a particular time. So you use the tools that we've got to bring people together.
That's great. Thank you so much, Laura. I think some really, really useful examples of some good practice there, which is really good to hear, that hopefully some of you will find motivating, that we can actually challenge some of these things that are taking place in our workplaces at the moment. So could I ask Jane Kennedy, please? You're next, Jane.
Okay.
Thank you, Jane.
Hi everybody. Hopefully you can all hear me now. Just really picking up, my name's Jane Kennedy. I'm actually the organiser in the Northern and Midlands office, And I thought that what might be useful, sort of following on from what Laura has talked about, really, is to pick up on some particular issues around that. I also want to apologise if I keep going in and out, because unfortunately, in a world where we're communicating with one another by internet, my internet's gone, and Sky and I are having a conversation about that, but that's not moving quickly, so I'm on a mobile broadband, so I apologise if I keep going in and out. I think the first thing that, in terms of what Laura said about keeping in touch, I think with your employer, with your group chapel, is a really good place to start, because I think that questions are coming up all the time on how this is unfolding, how it's unfolding for people in furlough, how it's unfolding for people in work. So I think that is a really good and important tip. Clearly in the newspaper sections and in the regions, we've got the opportunity to do that through the group chapels, but also at local levels there have been some really good kind of group chapel ideas in terms of coming together and making it a bit of a social thing. We have a couple of the chapels who actually do it on a Friday night and kind of get a glass of wine and have competitions. So I think that's also important in kind of, you know, helping people to get through the process. I think in terms of the challenges of this process, especially for people who've been put on furlough and people who've experienced pay cuts, is how we address that with the companies and how we go into discussion with that, because there are issues of that are coming up all of the time, and I'm sure that other colleagues will talk about the kinds of things that we've been doing, and you may well have been also doing these in your chapels, and if not, then, you know, of course, please, in terms of the areas, come back to the officials to talk about them. For example, the cutting of people's salaries is technically something that should be done in consultation with people, and as Laura said, it often hasn't been done in consultation with people, or it's been done in a way that says, yes, if you don't agree, if you don't come back to us, then you've effectively agreed. We are now developing through the group chapels and through with individual chapels some collective ways of responding to that. In some chapels, what they've said is, well, what we say as a chapel is we'll agree for it for now, but actually we're only agreeing to it temporarily, and actually come the end of the furlough, we're not agreeing to that. So it actually allows then for a period of time for the employer not to be able to say, oh, well, you've just agreed that for all time and that's a permanent change to your contract. So we're trying to protect people's positions through that. That's a very difficult thing to do on your own, but if you do that collectively, it's much easier to do. Chris may talk about that more as well, but we're trying to develop some standard letters around that and so on that we've done in the various group chapels. So again, if there are chapels who aren't part of that group chapel process, then do, you know, come back to us, and there is that developing work out there that hopefully that would help people. There are some things in terms of what the employers have not worked out about what furlough should be, and a very good source of information, ironically, about this, if you go to the HMRC web pages about job retention, they're being updated every day, because clearly questions are coming up that people have not thought about. And one of the interesting things that's on there that I looked at, and Chris and I looked at, and we believe is an important one, if you've been furloughed and you've just been furloughed on the basis of 80% of your normal pay, if you take holiday while you're on furlough, you're entitled to be paid your full wage for that holiday, for the statutory 5.6 weeks. Now, I would think that maybe a lot of employers hadn't even worked that out, and we know that one of our big employers was very keen for people to take holidays, and then seemed to move back from an issue, and whereas one of the other employers, what they did more sneakily in a way was that they cut people's pay and then put them on furlough. Then when people went on holiday, they would only be on that already agreed pay cut. So there are things like that that are important. Interestingly, we've had a number of questions with people around minimum wage, and if their 80% takes them below the minimum wage. And there is the argument now on the government website is that minimum wage only applies if you are working. Therefore, if you are being paid not to work, it does not apply. And therefore, if the 80% takes you below the minimum wage, that does not matter. I'm not saying that's a good argument. I'm just saying it's interesting to see that that's the argument that's now been put forward. Another piece that's been put on the government website just this morning, I think, is about trade union reps and the fact that if you are furloughed, you are entitled to act as a trade union rep. You can do all the things that you would normally do as a trade union rep, and the employer has to agree to that in a recognised workplace. So in terms of the challenges of people trying to look at this thing, I hope that gives you kind of some things to think about. I think the rotated furlough again is also something that everybody is sort of looking at, because it has a number of issues, I think, in terms of people's mental well-being, sort of being in work and being out of work, also concerns for people that they felt if they've been put on furlough, are they the ones that are being down the line, are they likely to be redundant? And we've make sure that in your conversations with the employer that you get assurances from them that proper redundancy processes will take place at the end of that process, and remind them that if they're not, you will hold them to account. I mean, we all know, that they don't act well, but I think it's important for us to stay early out, that we are watching what they are doing in terms of that, and to remind them that all normal rules apply here. Because I think sometimes it's now, it's a pandemic and therefore none of the basic rules apply. They all apply in the same way that if you're on furlough, all of your terms and conditions still apply. So I think that is important. I think in terms of, I don't know whether people are still in having that, and hopefully I think it's been resolved now, but we had some issues with regards to key worker status early on, because key worker status was actually left to local authorities to make a decision about who was a key worker. And there were some local authorities, we had some issues in Wales where they didn't designate journalists. That was important for people who had children, because it meant they couldn't get their children into school because they didn't have that status. We've argued successfully where we've needed to do about that. So again, if that's something that in an individual area that hasn't been addressed with your local authority, again, do come back to us, because we've got experience with dealing with that kind of thing.
2 minutes, got 2 minutes left.
And okay. Right, thank you. I think essentially that's probably everything that I wanted to say. And just really ending where I began, really, I think the crucial thing is about keeping in touch. We are here to help. Please do reach out to us and keeping in touch with one another, because I think the more information that we've got, the more we can help each other in actually addressing the issues that come up. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jane. That was great. Again, added to the information that Laura talked about, and in particular going through the stuff around furloughing and the rights of reps, I think is really important, because this is information that we need to know in order to be able to challenge employers and know what rights we've got to be able to do that. So thank you ever so much, Jane. Any of this, we can always follow up some of this anyway with sending links to people that are on the call here. So Nick, could I ask you now to do your presentation?
Sure. For those of you who don't know me, I'm one of the officials in the Scottish office, where we work across all the sectors, including broadcasting and freelance. The Scottish situation is not significantly different to the UK situation as a whole. The last month and a half have really been like trying to predict an avalanche while being on top of that avalanche. We don't know how far it's going to go, or what the end effect is going to be, or how long we're going to be on it. All we know is the direction of travel is not particularly good. On the positive side, we have seen at this time, we've dealt with a lot of people wanting to join or rejoin the union. Just as there are no atheists in foxholes, it's certainly true that in a time of crisis, people are looking for us for what advice we can give. I've been very keen, and this morning I was kind of brought up where I've realised there's a gap in our communication. Firstly, how important our chapel structure is at this point in talking to our members. Now, there's all sorts of different challenges coming from that, in that we're not normally in a workplace, which makes it a lot more difficult for organising, a lot more difficult for the basic communication. Luckily in Scotland, on the big workplaces, we've been through sort of industrial ballots, so we're pretty confident that all our chapel lists are as up to date as they can be. What we have found as well is the employers, well, we have a basic structure of sort of furloughs, layoffs and so on, which the government has come up with, which is a radical economic policy. From if you could imagine this coming 3 months ago and someone predicting it, you would have said it was far-fetched, but we are where we are. How those individual companies are choosing to implement that varies a great deal across the titles. Associated are, you know, offering share and share buybacks for those there. STV, who were one of the best employers up here, I think as a result of us having industrial action with them, or ballots for industrial action a couple of years ago, they're very good. People on furlough, they're rotating, they're topping up to 100%. They communicated with us very well. The BBC, the main core of the BBC, can't furlough, but are still very badly affected. Pacific Key, which is the headquarters of BBC Scotland, is at 7% occupancy. And part of the trouble that they're finding is how they gradually increase that across the building. I mean, it's 7% occupancy is 130 people. So you can imagine how big the entire building is. They have to look at how they bring in news while respecting social distancing. DC Thomson have reverted to type. They hate us and have put people on furlough without telling their colleagues, or without, you know, sort of publishing sort of any rationale for how they have done it. Funnily enough, NewsQuest, who one of the worst employees, have really stepped up to the mark. And I think what really changed was that we had challenging industrial. We had a ballot for industrial action just before Christmas. That brought around an increase, and we also managed to get a bullying manager sacked, and the person that we normally dealt with, we're now dealing a level above him, with someone who is actually quite effective. We've also got a good chapel structure there, and we've managed to, although our old MOC moved away, the new FOC has very much stepped up to the mark and taken on roles. We're seeing the opposite at another of our big chapels, where the FOC, long-standing FOC, left just before this kicked off. So we're in a wee bit of turmoil there. We're still playing catch up, and that's why I say we can understand how important the chapel structure is for communicating with members. It's been a stress test of crap management. We can see those employers who don't enjoy the trust of their employees also tend to be the ones who claimed that they couldn't come to us and talk to us about what they were doing before in furlough. What they've found fundamentally is that when they've gone to employees and said, we're doing these pay cuts, we're doing these furloughs, it is put bluntly, the employees didn't believe them. You know, there was a degree of skepticism and a culture of skepticism based on these employees being every year told there's been cutbacks. In some cases, I think employers are being very cynical in how they're implementing this. I think they are looking at, in some cases, declining businesses, and have taken in the opportunity to have huge sums of money thrown at them by the government and taken off, you know, the expenses sheets of those employers, and have done that without actually really doing the business case for it, and are simply taking the money where it is. On the reach regionals, I believe pagination is still staying the same, but there are a significant amount of furloughs, about one across every one of, I think, about 18 titles on the regionals. So you can imagine the stress that it's laying onto those existing employees who are working from home as well. The The other thing I would stress on this is communicating with our members and letting them know we're there, and also what I call sort of shaking the tree. Whenever I put anything out to Scottish members, I say, right, let us know of problems that are happening, and that's really, really useful for building up a picture around the country. And it's useful particularly in our small, the smaller workplaces, where we find that we've perhaps only got sort of a dozen or so members and perhaps not a working chapel, but we're finding that different members are being dealt with entirely differently. And the two don't know of one another because there's not that communication. So anything that encourages communication to flow up is really, really useful. It also sometimes just gives confidence. The number of members we have in workplaces who I've spoken to this week who in some cases just needed someone to talk to, which is not a job of an official, but those members are ones that we tend to have had casework with before, and they are feeling the stresses before the other members of the workplace are. So, for example, a member I dealt with came to me earlier this week saying that he had problems with working from home. There'd been no risk assessments on working from home. He was working for a kitchen table using a chest of drawers, and you know, what duty does the company have? And it was clearly causing him quite significant health problems. Now that's something we can then take forward industrially. If it's affecting that member now, who is pretty much the canary in the mine, it's going to be affecting a lot more members and for longer as this goes on. I think I've given a very brief overview of what's happening in Scotland. I don't think there's any more to say, but I'm happy to take questions.
That's great, Nick. Thank you very much. If anybody's got any questions, please do put them on the chat function and then we can address them at the end. That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you. We've already got one, so we'll come back to that point at the end. Thank you again, Nick, for giving us a Scottish overview. There are clearly there are some themes amongst all employers at the moment, but there are some examples of some good practice. So if I could ask Chris Morley, please, if you wouldn't mind doing your presentation.
Right, hello everyone. For those that don't know me, I'm Chris Morley. I'm the Northern and Midlands Senior Organiser based in Manchester, but currently based in the Black Country. Now, inevitably, we're going to be, I'm going to be ploughing the same furrow as my colleagues. We are, you know, we're dealing with a totally new situation, and I wanted to emphasise that. I mean, the measures that have been brought in by the government have no precedent, and as such, that means that there's a whole load of new rules that have been brought in that affect that come under employment law, and so where members, as we all know as reps, very often say, well, what's the legal situation? Don't blame us as officials for saying, well, we're not absolutely sure, to be honest, but we will find out. And, you know, as a union, we will be pushing where we have to. There is plenty of poor practice, and I think that what I would want to get across is that although we are in a totally new situation, I think the values and the attitudes, behaviour, activities that we as trade unions have a massive role to play in our members' lives at the moment. And you know, the key thing is to remain collective wherever possible, and that's really important when we've got people, as we are now, sat in multiple locations on their own. The union is the glue that can really bind people together and help them through what is incredibly stressful situations. The whole issue of furloughing, I think initially when it was put forward, I think it's an American concept. People thought, well, that's an easy option. I can absolutely say that we as officials are getting a lot of members on furlough who really, I think, probably have got it hardest of all. although the workload for those staying in work is huge, if you're on furlough, you've got time on your hands, and you're starting to think about you know, all the uncertainties that there are on the other side of it. And not unreasonably, members are thinking, well, if I've been furloughed, the company's doing without me, then that puts me in prime position for redundancy. It doesn't necessarily follow that that is the case, but I think that it's something that members will definitely be worried about and conscious about. What I would say is that there is no automatic translation from furlough to redundancy. There will have to be a separate process if on the other side of the government retention scheme, which we know has been extended to the end of June, then they will have to consult about those redundancies, and all the usual rules would then apply. So in terms of poor practice, I think a number of my colleagues have already talked about lack of consultation, and that is absolutely true. The initial, the hardest blow fell with NewsQuest. That was in which they announced 15% pay cuts on earnings over 18,000, and 40% of the staff being furloughed, and those that were on furlough would only get 80% of pay. So they have held a meeting with us, and we're now seeking more. But we've been working with the chapels through the group chapel structure, and I think that has been extremely useful, and chapels have reinvigorated. We've got new leadership in some chapels, and there is recruitment as well. But the point about, if there is a lack of consultation, we as journalists should be used to getting our foot in the door, and we shouldn't allow them to get away with that. If these companies are getting huge amount of public money, which they are, then they need to be more open about how they are using that public money, and that gives us a way in. So continue as reps to push for to get the questions that members are asking answered, not only glibly or just tick box, but the real information. We're doing that with Reach in particular. We're fortunate there because they're a public company, and therefore they have duties to make certain information public. We've done a look at the books there, and their staff costs are £240 million a year. So you can work out roughly what they're getting in government subsidy by putting 20% of their staff on furlough. It's not a scientific figure, but it comes out at about just under £1 million a week. So for every week of lockdown, that's the government footing £1 million of the wage bill. We are making sure that we've got a very good group chapel structure within Reach, and we are having national meetings with them where we're trying to extract information. That's continuing, but it's also important, going back to what I said originally, that the chapels put the pressure in from the bottom as well, because we know that management are really sensitive about how people are feeling at the moment, and the arguments around making sure mental health, for instance, is particularly having resonance with management, something that they've started to take more seriously, but now I think they realise that it is literally deadly serious, and I wish that they were doing more. I can't say that they're doing enough, but we need to keep the pressure on in regard to that. Things still go on as normal. Just to say, for the first time, I carried out a disciplinary with a member that was accused of gross misconduct. throughout using video call. This is really not best practice, and it really shouldn't be happening, but in the present circumstances it had to, and I'm pleased to say that that member actually kept their job. And I think that's the thing that we shouldn't lose sight of, that we can still be in there and still make a difference, no matter, you know, how difficult the circumstances. It's regretful that we're not there personally to be able to you know, provide the emotional support that always needs to be given in disciplinaries, but they still need to be done. There is going to be a backlog. Things like grievances do get pushed back, and it's really important for reps to make sure that they don't get, you know, put back unreasonably, and as things develop into this holding pattern that we're in, there is less excuse on the company to you know, to build in unreasonable delays around grievances. I think when it comes to what we should be negotiating.
1 minute left. 1 minute left.
Okay.
Thank you.
Negotiate furlough, particularly. Make sure that there's fairness. So that includes things like rotating furlough, so that different staff get a chance to recuperate from heavy workload, and furloughed staff come back and feel valued as part of the overall operation. Thanks, Caroline.
Thanks very much, Chris. That was great, really good, and again introduced us to some other particularly areas of problems that we need to consider. But as you can see, there are lots of themes here that are common to us all, and I think that's really important. And you know, what's really important, I think something that Chris said that really stood out for me, which is the union is the glue to bind people together, and it's this collective idea that we need to kind of remember, even when we're working in isolation and we're away from our colleagues in our workplaces. So thanks ever so much, Chris. Can I ask Paul, please, to do his presentation?
Hi everyone, my name is Paul Seeger. I'm the National Broadcasting Organiser, which, as you can probably work out, involves looking after broadcasters, TV and radio. I did think when I saw the running order for today it was going to be quite good to go last, but now I realise that it's not so good because all the good things have been said. So so mine might be shorter than 10 minutes. So as I say, I look after broadcasters, and I think, you know, listening to other colleagues speaking about the experiences that they've had, I would say generally the broadcasters, certainly the main ones like ITV, ITN and the BBC, have behaved very well during this COVID-19 crisis. The biggest problem that we have probably got is with freelancers who have kind of fallen through the net of a lot of the government schemes, and in particular freelancers who work at the BBC, who the BBC isn't allowed to furlough staff. So we've got something like 3,000 freelancers who are going through a particularly hard time at the moment. We've put a lot of pressure on the BBC to try and force them to pay freelancers based on what they would have earned during this period. We haven't got that far with that idea there, but all we've got is a hardship fund, which they launched yesterday, which is basically a loan. So it will be people who have worked for the BBC at some time in the last 12 months as freelancers will be eligible to apply, but also it will be assessed on whether they will be getting future work, and if it's assessed that they would have got future work or will get future work, then they'll be eligible for a loan of £1,000 a month, depending how long this goes on for. So they could get £1,000, £2,000 or £3,000 over the next 2 or 3 months, but they will have to pay it back. And they'll only pay it back if they get the work, and it will be paid back up to over a period of 12 months. So a lot of freelancers are angry about that, because they say that, you know, that it will just get themselves more and more into debt. But that's as much progress as we've made with that particular scheme at the moment. But as I say, most of the broadcasters, I think, have behaved very well. One of the things that they've done regularly is regular meetings. The BBC started off by having bi-weekly meetings, and at ITV and ITN we were having, you know, 1 or 2 meetings a week as and when we did it. And I think dialogue is one of the key things. I think if staff know they're being kept informed, that really helps them deal with some of the situations and understands that the problems that they're going through. Chris touched on mental health, and I think that is a key issue during this. A lot of people are enjoying working from home and are equipped to cope with that, but some people hate it. They don't like being on their own. They like the banter of being in the office, and I think that's something that can't be underestimated. And the longer this goes on, because for example, the BBC, they're saying that they don't expect full capacity of their buildings this year. They're hoping maybe to get up to 1,000 people, which will be about a quarter of what is normal. So that will mean the vast majority of people will continue to work from home. And then again, something that's been touched on is health and safety issues at home. So I think, in the short term, people understood it was an emergency. They were happy to work from home, with a laptop perched on the edge of a kitchen counter or whatever, and perched on a stool and work that way. But that's not really sustainable over the next few months if that's what's going to happen with people working from home. So we need to start asking those questions about whether people are going to be supplied with the proper equipment. So not just laptops and mobile phones, but also desks and chairs, which in the short term, to be fair to employers, it wasn't something they could deal with. But I think going forward over the next coming weeks and months, we need to make sure that our members do get the proper equipment to working from home, because otherwise we could have long-term health issues with bad backs, RSI, etc. I mean, I talked about how I thought that a lot of the employers were behaving well, and the large ones were, but some of the smaller ones maybe less so. So we had one example where people were being asked to come and live in the office for 7 days at a time. So 7 days on and 7 days off, live in the office. So they didn't have to travel to work, and the employer said this is a really good gesture because you won't be at risk from getting COVID-19. You just live in the office. Not surprisingly, a lot of people weren't too keen on that, and thankfully, thanks to the union pressure, that went away. And the other issue that is an ongoing problem is holidays, with people being persuaded or forced to take holidays during the lockdown, which is fine for many people because they can just spend it at home with their families, and that's not too bad. But again, back to mental health, if you happen to live on your own and you were expecting maybe to go away to Benidorm for a couple of weeks with your mates, and suddenly that's been cancelled, and you end up spending 2 weeks in a flat just on your own and not seeing another person, that again has got some mental health issues. And originally a lot of the employers were saying that they weren't going to allow people to cancel their holidays because it was good that people started to use up holidays. But again, with some union pressure, we did manage to get to a compromise where they were told they had to take a week, but anything longer than that they would be allowed to cancel. And just finally, I mean, I think a lot of the problems are, in a way, we can turn to our advantage. So, for example, it's not ideal to do virtual meetings, but actually, would we have got 25 of us together today, all in London, all face to face? No, we wouldn't. So, the idea of virtual meetings means that we can have more meetings, we can get more people to attend from around the country. So, in many respects, that's a plus if we start to use virtual meetings to get more people together. And finally, I know a lot of employers are rubbing their hands with glee, thinking this is an opportunity to get through some changes that they've always wanted to do and unhide behind COVID-19. But actually, everything's up in the air. So this is an opportunity for us as union members to also get some changes that maybe we've always wanted and can use this as an excuse. So, for example, home working. A lot of people have had home working turned down in the past by their bosses, and suddenly now we're proving that home working can work. The vast majority of us are working from home. Productivity hasn't gone down. So going forward, there really is no argument if people want to work from home to have that turned down. So I think we got to try and turn these obstacles and these disadvantages to pluses and advantages.
Thank you very much, Paul. That was great. And I just want to pick up on one point. You talked about, the importance of virtual meetings. This is the first, but it is going to be the first of many. And at the end, I'm going to ask you to send me an email and just let me know how often you would like these meetings. We're talking about once a fortnight, but if you think it would be useful to have them more regularly, then please do let us know, because at the end of the day, this is about how we can support you as reps and how you can support your members. So we need to ensure that we're giving you what you need to be able to do that. So please do feedback on that for us. So thank you, Paul. And last of the officials, please, Fiona, if you wouldn't mind giving your presentation. Thank you.
Hello, colleagues, and first of all, Happy International Workers' Day to all attending. If you don't know me, my name is Fiona. I am the national organiser for magazines, books and PR sector. So that's the sort of those sectors are reflected in some of the information in my presentation. So first of all, with the challenges, well, we've had, you know, like others have said, it's kind of divided along very unsurprising lines. The places where we've had the worst challenges are usually the worst employers too. They're places where we don't have collective bargaining. Unfortunately, in these three sectors, there are a lot of places where we don't have collective bargaining, where we've got members, and the response of those places have been sort of predictable. So some of the worst things that we've got on. We've got a company who is trying to make permanent changes to people's contracts under using COVID as an excuse. These aren't just sort of temporary salary cuts or any of the sort of things that your average employer is going for. They're going after people's enhanced redundancy terms, they're going after people's enhanced sick leave, and they're also applying that to a large group of workers that they're currently transferring in from another company who should be protected by GP. And this is sort of touches on something that Chris Morley said earlier about where's the law at, and at the moment it's at nowhere really. As some of you will know, the way that law is made in this country is very based around case law, and obviously on a lot of this stuff we just don't have any case law at the moment, and until we do it can be very difficult to interpret it. So, you know, all the more important to act collectively rather than rely on the law. Unfortunately, at that workplace we don't have a collective agreement, but we're trying to muscle in and contribute collectively to the consultation that's happening, so that they don't end up with 30 odd people that they're going to have to potentially dismiss if they won't accept the new contracts. Another place where we're not recognised, and Paul Breeden, who's on the call, has been dealing with. This is a company, a multinational but not huge, where they've decided in their infinite wisdom that they're just going to close down their London office. They're trying to claim that it's not practical to furlough and mothball the office for now. They're absolutely determined to go ahead and make everybody redundant. And again, depending on how that all plays out, there may or may not be a case of unfair dismissal there, but no guarantees at the moment. So we're just going to see how that plays out, and try and influence that as best we can, and help individual members. And then another sort of problematic response we had from one employer where we don't have recognition is, this was right at the start of this crisis, they wrote out to all of their staff, giving them 1 day to agree to some swinging changes that were being proposed, furloughs, pay cuts, short-time working. There was absolute panic. They immediately had to withdraw the letter and propose just the furlough part of it, and some voluntary pay cuts they're offering, very strangely. And every attempt that any of our members have made to just ask questions, raise concerns about any of the proposals, have been being met with a very aggressive response, because this company is quite allergic to the NUJ. And they are us as being kind of, you know, orchestrating things and putting people up to asking awkward questions, when, to be honest with you, this is how the staff are feeling anyway. So a lot of this has been about me basically browbeating the HR director to let him know that people asking questions is a healthy part of the process, and it's important that people should do that, engage with their own working lives, for God's sake, and have reasonable, coherent answers to the questions that they're raising. And that goes even if the question seems far-fetched to the employer, because people are very stressed at the moment. Yeah, so those are the sort of worst aspects. We've had some good practice there as well, and I'm happy to name and praise these employers. At both Penguin Random House and at DK, we've negotiated agreements for furlough. People on furlough will be paid at 100%. The furlough system is semi-voluntary anyway, so it's really people who it most suits who are taking it. For example, if they've got very onerous childcare commitments and it's just impractical to work. They've given a written commitment to review all of this at the end of a short period. It's 3 months or when the furlough scheme ends, I think is actually how it's worded. So we'll all come back and talk about next steps thoroughly at that point. Up front to abiding by the existing enhanced redundancy terms that they've got, if redundancy should become necessary further down the line. They've also committed to fully consult at that point about any redundancy, so there wasn't any sort of agreement up front or anything like that about job cuts. And in return for all of that, the chapels there have agreed to accepting a 0.5 day per week holiday sacrifice for the period that they're on furlough, when they saw that as a decent deal, considering the fact that we're getting 100% pay. At Immediate Media, where we're recognised, there's been quite a few changes, and some of them been better than others, including they do have pay cuts without hour cuts, but it's a sliding system, and the highest paid executives are taking the biggest pain, and the lowest paid are not facing a pay cut. So it's actually progressive. And also they've made a commitment as part of this pay cuts. Now they're also paying at 90% on a sliding scale progressively anybody who's on furlough. So but they've committed that they're going to work with the unions. It's a joint agreement with NUJ and BECTI there. They're going to work with the unions. They're going to come up with a metric by which they can measure financial performance with a view to, if they can, paying back some or all of the cut pay at the end of the year. So that's going to be a consultative process with the unions, both the drawing up of those metrics and the applying of those metrics to the company's performance. So if they can't pay it back, which to be honest with you, I don't have high hopes on this, but at least there will be a transparent process and it will be abundantly clear to everybody exactly why they're not paying back if they can't pay back. And we can take that into account next year during the pay conversation, obviously. So it's just leaving the door open for further conversations on sorting out the pay cut situation in the future. Another place where we've had some good practice, and again it's around being progressive in the way that cuts are made, at Verso, where we're currently just negotiating recognition actually. It's a small employer. They are cutting pay, but they're doing that on a very graduated progressive system, and we negotiated that with them because initially they had put part-time workers into the progressive system at their full rate rather than a pro rata rate of pay, so it was disproportionately affecting part-timers as part of that. Something to look out for, I think. So we've readjusted that, and those people are kind of just taking the sort of proportionate amount of pain compared to their colleagues. Just in terms of a few tips of things to negotiate and things that we've got in places that I think are quite good.
You've got 2 minutes left, please.
That's fine. Perfect timer. Echoing what people have said about mental health, encouraging employers to have their line managers check in with all members of staff, I think at least once a week if possible, for a one-to-one, so they're monitoring mental health proactively. There's been some companies have provided specific wellness resources like free subscriptions to mindfulness app and things like this, which some people are scornful of. And also employers who are providing online training resources for furloughed employees to access, because there's obviously a big mental health cost to furlough, and being occupied and improving your skills during that time is a nice positive thing to be able to do. Echoing other comments about asking for risk assessments of home working and proper provision of kit. We've got one employer at the moment who is offering a loan for people to buy a suitable home computing equipment, which I think is a bit out of order, because it's, if you don't need it, if you didn't need it for work, you wouldn't need it, would you? So why should you have to buy it on a loan? I would advise chapel reps to be checking in with members of their chapel who are currently on maternity leave, because I don't know about anybody else, but I'm getting inundated with women who are on maternity leave and are feeling very vulnerable, understandably. So check with them, and also encourage your chapels to keep an hours log of work that they're picking up for furloughed or short-time working colleagues, because then we won't face a situation after all of this where it gives the appearance that it's been possible to do the same level of work with far fewer staff. Obviously, people are going to be going the extra mile with hours, but that's not a long-term sustainable solution. So I think just track that as Chapel so that you're able to make your case for returning the staffing levels to the proper place at the end of all of this. And that's it. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Fiona. Really comprehensive. All these kind of briefings, really interesting. I think the practical keep records and keeping log of extra work is really, really important, because we've got to be able to demonstrate it and evidence it in the future. And it's really important we've got that evidence there and we don't look back on it and think, well, why didn't we write it down at the time? So I think it's important to have those conversations now so that we can start logging it and getting that evidence together. So finally, thank you very much to the officials. We've now got Adam. Adam is the chair of the National Health and Safety, the NUJ National Health and Safety Committee, and you've got no more than 5 minutes, please, Adam.
Okay, that's fine. Very quickly, I was primarily going to be thinking of reminding people about risk assessments and the process for people who may have been in the prospect of going back to work. But at the same time, we've heard very much about other concerns, whether it's mental health, working at home, the equipment, and what people need to bear in mind. For those sorts of things, there is a huge amount of information on the Health and Safety Executive website, and it's a matter of going to hse.gov.uk and working through it to see what is actually there and the material that you need. Employers should be providing you with computer equipment that is safe, and also making sure that your workspace is safe. Now, ideally, they should be risk assessing each and every home working situation. And clearly, with social distancing at the moment, that's not possible. But at the same time, reps, especially health and safety reps and chapels, should make sure that they've got health and safety reps, because they've got additional powers, even at the moment. The health and safety reps should be asking for copies of risk assessments for everybody's home working situation. It's up to the employer to do those as best they can. If the reps don't think they're good enough, they can challenge them. And again, it's where the collective very much helps. Make sure you've got in chapels the health and safety reps, because they ask so much. Again, if you don't have a chapel, there are scope for if the chapel isn't recognised and you don't have recognition, the chapel can still appoint safety reps, and again, they have additional powers to call for information from employers. The other thing that reps can do, as far as health and safety concerns are involved, is to carry out inspections. Now, inspections are not just looking around an office or a newsroom, they include doing research. You have to let management know that you're going to be carrying out an inspection, so quite how they monitor what you do in terms of research. But they've got to respect the confidentiality of conversations that you may have with members and colleagues about their safety concerns. And that covers everything from whether the laptop is appropriate and is it okay for their eyes, is their sitting position okay, is it causing problems with upper limb disorders, are they straining their backs, or in terms of COSH itself, of COVID and the coronavirus itself, assessing potential infection risks wherever you may be working. And it's important to remember as well that health and safety is not just at your workplace, it is a place wherever work is being carried out. And employers have obligations to protect you from risks that may be presented by coming in contact with, whether that's directly, physically, when you're out and about, or online. So again,
1 minute left, please, Adam.
Safety rep, I've got that, to make sure that they're asking for risk assessments, challenging them where necessary, and then agreeing with negotiation precautions that are reasonable. Risk assessments need to be suitable and sufficient, precautions need to be reasonable. It's where we can achieve industrial a huge amount to protect our colleagues right across the board. We don't use it enough. and particularly around going back to work, we'll need to call on it an awful lot. And no doubt we'll be doing something like this very similarly again to look at that particular topic when we get there. I've already had one question that I'm going to talk to somebody here about afterwards, one-to-one. So again, we'll take questions, and if we need to, Carol and I will talk about how we can perhaps organise something particularly around health and safety issues fairly soon. And I see Caroline nodding, so looks as if we'll be doing that. All yours.
Thank you so much, Adam. That was great and really important.
4 minutes 52.
Really important to raise those issues, and I put some links on the chat around risk assessments, inspections. We are planning on doing an online health and safety reps course. Whether you've done the health and safety reps course or not, this is going to be specifically around COVID-19 and looking at the specific risk assessments around that and these specific issues that you need to be thinking about in terms of addressing mental health, physical health, all the stuff that Adam talked about how you set up your workspace. All those kinds of issues. We're going to be basing the workshop around that. So please look out for that. You're all on the list now, so you will get an invitation from us. So again, if you've done your health and safety reps training before, it doesn't matter. This one is specifically for COVID-19, so you can all come on it. But it will be limited to smaller groups of people because we want it to be interactive and want people to be able to have more discussions. And of course, we can't do that with large groups, but there will be plenty of them, so don't worry. So finally, we've got an opportunity now to ask some questions. We've got 20 minutes now for people to ask some questions, and I've had a couple of questions. One from, I've had a couple from Bimpei, and I've also had one from somebody else. I'm going to go back and look at the list, but Bimpei, are you still on the call? Because I know you keep dropping out. If you are,
Yes,
would you like to ask your question, and then if an official would like to indicate whether they would like to answer it or not?
I've lost my chat, so which one were you talking about? I had a couple of questions.
Yeah, Bimpei, you can ask. You were talking about the role of chapels and branches, so how you could use chapels and branches, how you could access branches.
Yeah, I know, because we're hearing a lot about the branch support that some of the branch officials have been giving. We're quite detached from our branch because we've been quite self-sufficient, and some of you would use our island organizer, but they're obviously very busy and there's different jurisdictions. So just at what point can you call branches in when you've got an issue, and in terms of just I was asking for advice, but also when do they start talking to management and when do the reps kind of hand over as such?
Okay, thank you, Bimpei. I shall ask one of the officials who would like to answer that. Fiona?
I think, but I think that the situation, I think the colleague Bimpei said that she's in Ireland, so I know that the structure works very slightly different there.
We're Northern Ireland, sorry.
I say Northern Ireland, okay, sure.
So that's a problem, and they're in the Republic, and they've got different situations, so we're more aligned.
Right, okay, no, I get you. I mean, the fact is that, I mean, all chapels need to make it their business to be involved with their branch. It is an important part of the sort of information handling structure in the NUJ. So if chapel members aren't interacting with branches just ordinarily, then that would be a good time to start that practice. But the fact is, you can get in touch with them for anything, and they are of information and advice for you. So don't be shy. I know that the branches that I work with most regularly are always very pleased when members engage with them, and are very pleased to help. And even if that help does involve letting you know that the branch can't help with this particular thing, and you maybe need to go and speak to Ian or Seamus or sort of refer it up the line that way. But reach out to them. The other thing that branches are giving out some sort of good advice about, quite often they've got paid Zoom accounts which might be useful for your chapel to be able to use. they're also receiving all of the sort of the NUJ's updates, and so we'll be able to potentially sort of direct you to information online as well. But I think most importantly, they're just interested, I think, in hearing from chapels, and so that the chapels in that branches area can compare notes effectively and be in touch, sort of like this meeting, but on a sort of very local level is how it ought to work, really. So have the opportunity to just talk through what's happening in your chapel and hear from other chapel officers in the same way, and that's obviously useful material for negotiations. So, you know, for any reason or none, engage with your branch right now is what I would say to all chapel officers.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Fiona. Thank you, Bimpei. I will come back to you, Bimpei, because you did ask another question, but I'm going to ask Sarah Wakefield if she'd like to ask her question. You there, Sarah?
Yeah, sorry, just struggling to unmute. Yes, the question, I think Adam's covered it really. I was just talking about the help for members to assess their workstations, really. Obviously, difficult for people to come out, employees to come out and have a look. So it was just advice on that, really. But I think Adam's covered it. And there's some really helpful links there.
Okay, thanks very much, Sarah. Is there anybody else who'd like to make a comment? Maybe Don, George, anybody else who's actively involved in negotiations at the moment? Georgina, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, I was really interested in what Fiona was saying. It was Verso maybe, but I might have missed a switching employer, just about the way they're applying the pay cut to part-time staff. Because my employer, JPI Media, has taken the same initial approach. So they're saying if you're part-time, we're going to decide how much to cut your pay based on your full-time equivalent salary. So we've got people who take home less than 18,000 and are still having their pay cut because their full-time equivalent salary would be more. The view of the group chapel is that's not a fair way to apply it, because they're applying it based on theoretical earnings, not someone's actual income. And we all base our household budgets on actual, not theoretical income. So I just wondered what had made that particular employer change their mind when you've been talking to them. Was there something in particular that kind of made them have that, oh, I see what you mean moment? How did you get to that point?
Well, it's an interesting one, because we're, as I think I mentioned, we're only just, we've got a great chapel there, but we're only in the process of negotiating recognition. We'd only just started when all this happened. So we've been a little bit sort of acting as recognised, and just sort of, we've just kind of bundled them into negotiating with us, really. The thing that made the difference with that was basically, I mean, it's quite a progressive employer anyway, so moral arguments work well with them. It's a left-wing publisher, so that helped. But we were just very clear and said, you know, at the moment you're doing this, it looks like you're going to inadvertently be potentially acting unlawfully, because you could be treating part-time workers less favourably. And I think there is, like I say, you know, the law's all over the place at the moment, so who knows the circumstances. I would see that as being quite clear cut. So we've pushed back with that, and it may be worthwhile, if you've got colleagues who have time, it might be worthwhile perhaps checking out legal surgery or something like that with them, just to see whether there is a little way through there, and you could perhaps go back to your employer and say, okay, well, we've looked into this, and actually there's going to be a claim here if you don't sort it out, basically. And that's sort of what we said, and they didn't want that. And to be fair, their reason for having a progressive system was to want to be progressive, to be a bit more fair with people. And problem with, you know, disadvantaging part-time workers is, you know, quite often you'll disadvantage particularly women as well, won't you, because they're more likely to be part-time. So you know, again, depending on the sort of maker of your workplace, there might be an argument around gender discrimination as well. But I think on that, because I arguing that, and certainly they responded as if we'd sort of hit gold with that argument. If I'm honest, they changed it right away.
Thanks, that's really helpful. And we did kind of try that tack with them and say we believe, you know, potentially this is going to be discriminatory towards certain groups. And we did take some advice from Natasha Morris and the legal team as well. We think actually it's probably hard to argue that, and the company are very clear that they think actually they'd be discriminating against full-time staff if they took the approach that we wanted. But I think we're going to go back to them again, because we've not really made the response to them that, well, that's all well and good, but you're talking about theoretical earnings, and people don't have theoretical financial problems. They have very real ones. And I think you're right. Most of the colleagues I'm aware of in my newsroom who are part-time are the female members of staff, and it's for childcare reasons. So I think we'll just have to keep trying and, I guess, make more of a moral argument with them, and hope they change their position on that. Maybe something where we do like a petition within the company, I don't know, because I think they're scared of a backlash from the full-time staff. So maybe if we can demonstrate that there isn't that feeling, they might be persuaded, I don't know. But it's still helpful to have an example employer that has changed its position that we can take back to them.
I'm really happy to I'd be really happy to put you in touch with our reps there as well, if that would be useful.
Oh yeah, thank you.
To have. That would be absolutely fine. I think, yeah, I love the petition idea. I love the idea of, you know, moving it a bit more towards the collective response rather than trying to rely on the law.
Cool, thank you for that, Fiona.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments that people would like to share? Richard, I noticed you put a question on chat. Are you satisfied with the answer there, or would you like somebody to talk to that as well? You're welcome to ask the question if you would like to. Okay, I'm not sure whether Richard's still there.
If perhaps I can come in as a question. I mean, Adam's advice, I think, is exactly spot on. The question is that we're facing in so many situations is not what the law is, but what are our effective means to enforce that? Because employment law is essentially retrospective. The law comes in after something bad has been done. If an employer doesn't provide PPE, what is our redress with that under the current circumstances? For that, I'm not quite sure. Perhaps Adam knows more than I do, but under normal circumstances, I think his advice is absolutely spot on. Still think it's spot on as it is at the moment, but the actual practical implications of that might be quite different.
Can I come in?
Yeah, please come in, Adam, if you'd like to.
I think the key thing with that is that the HSE website says that under the reporting of industrial diseases and dangerous occurrences regulations, exposure to coronavirus in the course of work should be recorded. If it's a near miss, it should also be put into an accident book and brought to the attention of your health and safety net. If it's happened, then clearly a risk assessment isn't fulfilling its purpose of being suitable and sufficient. So you can call then for a risk assessment to be revised. Again, some of it comes back to the fact that we, simply because of the nature of health and safety and public attitudes towards it over the last X many decades, we've not been using the scope that's there under the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. I propose back a long way. Actually call for risk assessments in advance and look at them and use them proactively. Where working conditions are changing, it's perfectly legitimate to ask for a risk assessment for the impact on, for example, the mental health and stress levels of those who are going to be left behind, so that we're acting proactively. Is the workforce actually sufficient? Are there enough people to do the work that's being expected? Your health and safety risk assessment can be absolutely critical in trying to prevent redundancies by stopping employers from trying to cut too many jobs and force too few people to do too much work when their health is put at risk. Is health, safety and well-being, they all come together under this piece of legislation, and we really need to be using it proactively, asking for risk assessments before things happen. Employers absolutely hate it. HRs aren't up to it. The health and safety executive isn't up to it because their resources have been cut and cut again over the last 10 years. It's up to the trade union movement to actually force the issue. We're unpopular with employers often as it is, so let's make ourselves a little bit more unpopular by asking for legally what's ours to protect ourselves and our colleagues.
Thanks very much, Adam. That's great. And I think the important thing here is that these themes that we're talking about, these are collective themes, and we should be dealing with these in a collective way through our chapels and using our health and safety and welfare reps. Some of you will have mental health first aiders in your workplaces as well, and you should be working with those. And we've got time now for one more question. Yin, do you want to ask your question? And is there anybody who would like to answer it particularly?
I'm guessing Adam's best place, and he did address that a little bit. I don't know if you saw my question I put up in the chat already, but it is basically about if anybody, in which case, thank you, yes, if anybody has best practice examples in regards to kind of addressing mental health issues. So I think at the moment, we do have MHFAs in where we are, and that they are all variously aware of different cases. I think that the situation now makes it more difficult because of the isolation and because of the difficulty, I think, in protecting people's privacy as well. So it's just, I'm not quite sure, for example, I'm aware of management's aware of some cases, for example, and they are, you know, looking into supporting people like that. But it's quite difficult to know how to ensure that nobody is slipping through the net, as it were, I guess.
Okay, thank you very much, and that's great. Who would like to answer that? Which official would like to answer that? Anybody want to indicate whether they've got a good example? Adam, would you like to answer it then very briefly, because we've only got a couple of minutes left, please?
Very quickly about best practice. Best practice varies greatly. It's very much personalised to each organisation and each circumstance. It's supporting people from depression and anxiety. There is a huge amount of online from organisations such as mine, from the Health and Safety Executive, from ACAS. You can spend sort of from now until whenever researching it all, but it's a matter of mixing and matching what you see there and really for a lot of people to try and identify what's best for them and then coming. But as well as providing that support, we need health and safety and well-being provisions to look for the underlying cause and address that as well. So it's a matter of helping people with the symptoms, but our collective effort has to be addressing the cause.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Well, we've kind of come to the end now, really. We've got about a minute left, so I'm just going to really wrap it up because we are going to be running more of these. This is recorded, so you can go back over. There are lots of links on the chat here. These links, you can go back to these links, but we're also happy to put these links up for you if it would be useful for you. Thank you so much for attending this call, for everybody for their contributions. I hope you found it useful, and as I say, we are going to be doing more of these. Can I just say, please do check up on the NUJ website. The NUJ website is being updated on a regular basis. It's really important that you use that to check in there. Lots of information on COVID-19 and its impact on members and how you can help your members. There's lots of information there for you to access. As I say, we hope to run another one of these in the next couple of weeks. If you would like something a little bit more often than that, then please do email me on tutraining@nuj.org.uk, which I'll put down here. And thank you very much. Stay well, stay safe, and we'll see you on the next webinar. Thank you. Bye.